Alright guys, so this is what's going on today. I came outside, heard a hissing noise, was like, what the heck is that? And I've got a water leak. This is actually the main water supply line to my house, so it's got to get fixed like right now, otherwise I don't have any water. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that today. So the first step to what you're going to do here is remove the messed up section of pipe. You can either use one of these or one of these, whichever you prefer. Pipe cutter, hacksaw. I'm going to use a pipe cutter. I just find it makes it a little bit more of a clean cut. The hacksaw will work just fine as well, but you may end up with it being a little cockeyed or whatever. And I don't want to deal with that. I want it to have a nice straight connection. So, use your pipe cutter. If you've never used one of these, it's pretty simple. All you do is tighten it down, turn it until it loosens up a little. Tighten it down a little more. Keep turning it. And eventually what it does is that little blade cuts right through the pipe, as you can see, which is happening now, as water is starting to come out of it. So there's that one. You want to make sure also that you give yourself enough room for the new fitting to go on there when you cut that off. You don't want to cut it too small. But I think we're good there. Yep. Okay. Actually, I'm going to cut this one a little bit lower, just because I want to give myself a little extra room to work with there. So after you've got your sections cut off, the next thing you want to do is clean everything up. I use a little sandpaper, get this nice and clean. Because you want your solder to be able to flow down in there without any contaminants to make a good bond, obviously. You don't want to get another leak, so you want to get all this old, corroded up garbage out of there. Get it nice and clean. So once you got that cleaned up, the next thing to do is start making, sizing out your fittings and everything, getting all that ready. Cutting, what I'm going to do is use the elbow, use a piece to slide up in that, a coupler, and couple it right onto that. So really here I'm just going to need enough to fill in the space of the coupler here and have a little space left over for me to flow the solder down in there. So the next step is go ahead and put your fittings on there so you can see where you need to cut everything and what size everything needs to be. So that's what I'm doing right now, I'm just using a little Sharpie. And I'm going to go ahead and cut this down to size real quick. So once you got everything cut down to size the way you want it, the next thing you want to do is take everything back apart and clean up all the joints. Anything where it's going to be making a connection on the inside and the outside, go ahead and clean it up. For the inside joints, I have this nifty little tool like this. So just stick that in there. Give it a few good turns. And what you want to see is it's nice and clean like this versus this. Maybe that wasn't a very good illustration. Let me show you one of the other connectors. Well, this is just dirty, but you get the idea. You want to get this up in there and get like some good sand marks and everything, something good for the solder to latch onto. Make sure it's cleaned up, make sure there's no oxidation, anything like that. And then for the joints like this, the inner, I guess you call them the male joints versus the female joints, you can sand it like I did here. So make sure you get everything sanded out and get everything cleaned up, get all the crud off of it. A nice, smooth surface ready for the solder to grab onto. So I've got everything sized, I've got everything cleaned up, and I'm just about ready to solder the connections together. However, there's some water still left in this pipe here, and if you've ever tried to solder with a pipe that still has water in it, that is just not going to work. So I'm going to heat this up and see if I can evaporate some of the water that's inside of it That way, when I go to solder, that water is not evaporating and causing problems with the solder getting nice and hot and making a good connection there. So I'm going to do that, wipe all my surfaces down, and then put a little flux on it. I'll show you that in just a moment. Alright, so then the next step is to take yourself a little brush and some flux. This is what I'm using. And get a little flux on your brush. And then what you want to do is go hit all of your connection points. Apply a liberal amount of flux to each connection point. Now the purpose of the flux is to allow the solder, when it's exposed to the heat, to flow down into the joints. So that is the purpose of the flux. You want that to flow down in there really well. And make sure you put it on both sides of the connector. I forgot to do it on that one there. Like I said, you don't want to goop this stuff on, but you want to make sure it coats the surface really well so that everything flows down in there. So to do that for each one of your connections. Okay, so once you have flux around all of your mating surfaces, the last step you want to do is get your torch heated up, or turned on rather, and then start heating up your pipe and applying solder. Now this part's pretty easy. The purpose behind what you're doing here is you want to heat the copper up evenly all the way around, and you don't want to try to stick the copper in there until it's hot enough. Now the way you do this, by the way, the solder is going to follow the heat, so you want to put the heat just to the side of where you're trying to put the solder in. So as you can see, I'm touching it there. The solder is not melting yet. You want to get that copper hot enough. So now I'm into the soldering portion, heating up the copper, feeding it solder. And it's kind of windy, which kind of sucks. But what you're doing is you're getting the copper nice and hot, so it sucks the solder up into the joint. You can kind of see how it's flowing down in there as I'm doing that. Oh well, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm touching it onto the copper and it's flowing right out down into the joint. That's what you want. There we go. Maybe you can see this one a little better. So as you can see, now that I've got everything soldered up, it's got a nice good connection. Plenty of solder in there. I may have gone a little too crazy with the solder, but I wanted to make sure I got a nice good solid joint. So there you have it. Repair made. Wait for this to cool down before you turn your water on, and you're ready to roll. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe. I've got a lot of other videos on how to do a lot of other stuff. Thank you.